Friends, today we are going to be painting this beautiful little, my version of an amaryllis. You'll notice I did keep the ends of the petals somewhat rounded, so I didn't make them kind of lily-like where they were bending over. I just thought this was easier. So that's what I went with. And real quick, we'll go over our supplies. I'm going to be using, as always, my 8 Velvet Touch brush round. Feel free to use your Degatos, those student brushes. I'm still using mine, been using these for 5 months, love them. You get a whole set for maybe $15 to $17, probably better right now. So I'll get you that link, look in Amazon. And I think it's just a great beginner set. And the points have been really great. They're very snappy as well. But today I will be using my 8 Velvet Touch round. I'm also going to be using my MeiLang palette. This just happens to be the one with the metallics. They also have, as you know, the 36 set, and it doesn't have the metallics, but because of the holidays, I've been using this bigger set. This is made by Paul Rubens. Really, really great paints. I love them, and they just have so many different colors already pre-mixed for you. I also have been filling those with my Paul Rubens tubes. I have on order and coming the specifically MeiLang tubes. Can't wait to get those. And make sure you have your 2 containers of water. So important for watercolors. You want to make sure you're washing your brush and then you're rinsing it, because watercolors are so transparent. You don't want to carry over if you're using red into your yellow, you know, so you want to do that. Got my palette here, got my paper towel here, and I think we're ready to go. So I already sprayed my paints just to kind of get them activated. That's how I do my pan paints. And I've got my palette here, and let's go ahead and get started. So I know in the past, the amaryllis that I have had in my house from those giant bulbs, so beautiful. They're typically a deep red. I'm going to make mine a little bit of a deep red, of a kind of some pink, because you know that is my favorite color. So what I will do first is I'm going to work a wash, a very light value wash, just meaning I have more paint versus, more water versus paint. So the color I'm going to be using in my MeiLang palette, I'm going to kind of go for their rose red or their ruby red, either one of those. But, you know, I always tell you, use the color that's kind of calling to you. Because I just really use whatever color comes to mind for me. So make sure and use that red color that you enjoy. The MeiLang palette, that's one thing. All of their colors are just so beautiful. If you need to see how dark or light the value is, just always have a little swatch paper here. And we want to try and incorporate not only a dark value of a color like this, but we want to have a mid value, and then we want to have a light value, because that's going to create a lot of depth and interest in your paintings. So make sure on as many colors as you can, you're playing with these values. This one is probably 90% paint, pigment versus 10% water. This one just has a little bit more water, so maybe 70-30. And this one is quite light. That is going to be what you use for kind of the foreground. So this is going to create a lot of depth in your paintings. So let me pick that up again. And I'm just picking up the paint, and then I just tap it on the side a bit. Again, you can go back, see where you're at. That's too dark. That's not the value I want. I want to go with my lightest value, because we can always build up in color. If you're not sure if you have too much water on your brush, just dab it off. And I'm going to start at the center of the flower. So to me, that's where it's going to kind of burst out and darkest. Then I will go ahead and wash my brush. I'm going to turn my paper here and just go in with that push and pull that you see me use quite often, and feather out that edge. Maybe rinse and wash again. feather it out even more. And there we go. We've got this beautiful blending here. You can even pull it out a bit if you like. And then feather that edge out again. Okay. Excuse me. Now, while it's wet, I might just go in and tap in a tiny bit, and I feel like I want to add a little of a different red in there just to get kind of a fun blend. So I picked up a little deeper red, and I'm going to tap in there, and you can tilt your paper, you can blow on it. Oop. Got that red paint splattering everywhere. So very beautiful to me. I love that. Now, I'm also, as you see, I'm a big fan of my Princeton 6 long round. It's also a velvet touch. It's got that beautiful wood handle that feels so nice, but it's got just a little bit longer and thinner point. And I like that for getting into these little areas here where I want to make, this could probably do it if you had a very light touch. But I feel like this brush just gives me a tiny bit more ability to get into a tight space. So there you go, that wet on wet, the beauty of watercolor. Why I just adore watercolors is working wet in wet. And I want to rinse my brush till it's got all that red off of it. As you can see, you might have to wash it a few times. I'm going to keep using that with the red, so I'm not going to be real picky about that. Now let's go to our next petal, and I don't want to go right next to this one because otherwise they're all going to blend together. So let's pick up a little bit more of that beautiful rose red, madder red, whatever color. I would just choose a couple different ones so that you have one that's a little deeper in color. And if you notice here, this drawing, by the way, is available on my website under the December blog. I put all the, November. I put all of the November drawings that are free in there. And you can also get my tutorial kits, which have these as a digital download, and you'll get the swatch, you'll get the drawing, you'll end up getting the digital version of the original. So I wiped off my brush, rinsed it, and I'm going to go in with that pull and push just to draw that out. Now, making sure I have a few little white spaces in there. I want to preserve those, and then I will just soften that edge again. All right, now I'll go in with that little bit darker red, and I'm just going to touch in right here. And you could, I don't know if you can see these, but I have these little filaments here. And you could go in, I very rarely use masking. I just don't really like it. I don't like having to rub it off. I feel like it maybe damages my paper. That's just me. But you could color those or you know, give those a brushing of some of that masking, and then that way it will preserve the whites. I just am careful when I'm going around them. All right, so I love that blend. Look at that beautiful blend. That's watercolors, you guys, and why I love it. So now I'm going to go to this petal here because I, again, don't want to go right next to that one because it's still wet. Pick up some more of that pinkish color. And going to go in and just lay a little bit of that down. And now wash and rinse my brush. So I've just barely got a damp brush, also called a thirsty brush. And I'm going to go in. Now, if your brush is wet enough, I have never had any issues with it damaging my brush. If this brush was drier, it might break off the edges around the brush, but I've had some of my brushes forever and I have not felt like it did that. I had a few of you ask me in that push and pull technique if it was ruining some of the bristles. And then just dropping in some of that red, and you can blow on it. And look at the beautiful, again, that beautiful blending. So this is pretty dry, and you know it's dry because it's not cold to the touch. So I've got that first glaze. What I'm going to do is go into the tip of my flower here, my flower petal, and I'm going to tap in around the edges and again use that push and pull technique to bring it down. So when you're laying that first little line here, it's pretty pigmented. I have a lot of pigment versus water because I'm wetting it and pulling on it. So the trick here is really to just tap into that edge. You don't want to go too far into it. And anytime I start getting that hard edge, I just go back into it and soften it. Now what I'm doing there is I'm just barely going over these little veins. Might pick up a tiny bit of that red, dot that in, kind of the red we used in the center here. And what I'll do, because see the little burst I'm getting, is I just go in. I don't really care for that. If you like that, keep it. And I just smooth out that edge. Keep kind of lifting, smoothing. That type of thing. So when you pull out, if you end up with that hard edge, just go in with a little bit of water. And there you go. Okay, we'll go on to our second petal here. I'm going to go in, picking up some of that darker value. So I'm kind of going on the edge with that dark value. And then just kind of tapping in. You don't even have to go a consistent line. And then wash and rinse my brush. You just want it wet and just tapping with the very fine point of my brush. I feel like I want it to be a little bit wetter than that. And pushing and pulling. Getting rid of that hard line. I just love this blending technique. I've used it for years. It's what just made it kind of easy for me. It's kind of fun. And when you can, leaving some of those little white spaces. At the same time, I go in with just a damp brush and I soften some of those edges, just like that. Now we can even pull out some little veins while that's wet, something like that. So there you go. And before it completely dries, I might just touch in here and there. And I try not to have my petals too perfectly round on the edges. I like them to be a little bit bumpy or some cuts into them, because I feel like that's what in nature really is how plants and things look. So going in again now to the edge of this one. And again, you don't have to go all the way around. Wash and rinse my brush. So we've just got a damp brush. And then touching. Now making sure when you're pulling these brush strokes down, they're going in the direction towards the middle of your flower. Because otherwise your veins are going to look kind of wonky. So we want to make sure they're all pointing. Now here I'm just softening those edges with the damp brush. You want those lines to all head towards the center of your flower. So your petals all lead towards the center, and then I go in and I just kind of soften that edge. That's just me. So I'm constantly wetting and drying my brush. But making sure to leave a few white spaces in there. There we go. So pretty. So now basically these are dry. I think we can go in and go ahead and do these other petals here. Now this is going to be a little bit harder for me because I've got these little filaments and things in there. So if you used your masking, you don't have to worry about that, where I am just going around them. I really like being kind of a naturalist, I guess, when it comes to that, and I like to just practice leaving those white spaces. Now we're going to go in and push and pull. It's kind of a good practice for me. Just constantly going in, back and forth. Keep feathering that out. There you go. And then I might pull some out here and there. And if you get that little burst at the end where you're, after you've pulled that out, go in with your drier brush and just clean up that edge. Just like that. Now while that's wet, I'll go in with that red and just tap in. Pick up a little bit more of that. See how saturating that red is. Boy, it's hard to get out of your brush. That's why it's so important you wash and you rinse your brush, because you want to get all of that out. I'm just encouraging it a little bit because it kind of dried. Cleaning up some of those edges. There we go. And just some clear water. Okay. Now if you want it to kind of blend a little bit more, you can either tip your paper, you can blow on there. I don't have my little straw. And it will help it blend. And then let's go ahead and move on to our second one here. Same thing. Grab that. Now, if the leaves, petals next to it are not dry, just give it a little bit longer. Damp brush, go along that edge. And I just keep wetting and rinsing my brush, tapping it off, because that red is so vibrant. It's going to be more staining, so you're going to have to keep rinsing your brush. Now I'm going to go in, that was actually the pink, and take that redder color like here and just tap in. Now to get that to blend, I might tip my paper. I can blow and get some really fun, beautiful effects. And then blend and kind of encourage that to move. There we go. So I'm going to leave that be just like it is. And let's go to our last petal here. Go into the center. Now I have a lot of those little white. This is actually where the 6 long would work really well, because I want to get into those little areas. So I want to be able to have a nice tip. To move around those. Look at how beautifully this works. I got too much there. So I'm just going to pick some of that up. Continue going around my little white filaments. There we go. Maybe some of that red in there. And now I'll do the push and pull, which actually I'll use my bigger brush so I can cover a little bit larger area. And notice I'm leaving some of those white areas on my petal. So some of those white spaces. Not just those little filaments, but some little white spaces. And then I'll go in and soften all these edges with just a damp brush. Again, that's just me. I just don't like the hard edges. I like everything soft. And I'm leaving definitely white spaces in here, not just the filaments, but little white spaces. Okay, now we'll go in and do the edge. So we're just really repeating kind of that same technique. Making sure I'm not putting my hand, push and pull. Don't want to get rid of that white space there, so being kind of careful about that. And we'll go to the next one. And make sure I don't put my hand in anything wet. Just outlining with a darker value. Wash and rinse my brush, and then go in and just pull that out. Tap in while that's wet. There we go. Look how pretty. Just love how watercolor behaves. Sometimes it just, seriously, it paints itself so wonderfully if we just trust it and let it do what it wants to do. So many times, if I just do not try to control it, it works out perfectly. Then let's just go here. Now I've got a little bit too much paint there. I can see it because it's almost creating a puddle. Wash, rinse my brush and go in. I gotta be careful, I just stuck my hand in that. Just pick up a tiny bit on my tip of my brush, go around. And now I want to soften all those edges. So I'm almost doing a lifting here. The damp brush. And there we go. Look at that. So the center of our flower, I think what I'm going to do, let's see here, let me get my picture. I think I'll make that, I'm going to make mine yellow. Now keep in mind, guys, sometimes when I paint my flowers, I kind of make them look how I want them to look. So they may not be perfect. And I'm just dotting in. I'm not getting every single little tiny piece of that. The other thing I'm going to do, if you put masking on your little filaments, you know, these little white things, let's just go in and give them a very light washing of yellow. And you don't have to fill in the entire piece. And while that's drying, I'm going to go in with a little bit of gold, yellow ochre. So that's this color on my palette. And that color is very strong, guys, so just use a tiny bit of it. And maybe even some brown. And just touch in while this is wet. And let it spread. Like that. And there we go. So I think really this is going to kind of be although the leaves of a lily get much thinner and turn on the edges, I'm going to do some just kind of fun things here with this just because that's what I like to do. And once these dry, I'll go in and deepen the color as it goes in there. But let's go ahead and do our stem here. So I've got a combination of sap green and my olive green, using the side of my brush and then up to the tip. Just like that. What I'll do is on the other side of that, I might use a tiny bit of that pinkish color, which I always love to add my flower color into my stems and leaves. I just think that's so pretty. And then using the side of my brush, I'm going to go in and create these other leaves. So I'm using a very light touch, bracing my side of my palm on my paper, and just going to use the tip, and then as I get into the wider part, spreading out my brush. There we go. And we're going to add other colors into this, just like we did this stem. Don't want to get too close to this stem. So while that's wet, I'm going to go in and add a little bit of that green, dark green, the olive green in there. As it gets closer to the base, I'll make it a little bit darker. And then might even add in just the tiniest bit of that pink. Green and red are opposites on the color wheel, so when they come together, they kind of create a muddy color. And I use that quite a bit as a shadow. And it just brings a beautiful coherency between the flower and your petals. So let's go ahead and do this other one. Grab some more of my sap green. Quite watery, because this is a large leaf, and using light pressure, holding my brush up, just light pressure, and as I want to get thicker, I apply more pressure and open up the belly of my brush. Get that wider stroke. So this is where your brush strokes come so into play, and it's so important that you're practicing those, because then you know how much pressure is needed to achieve that. And this little leaf here, if you can see that, it's in the background. So I'm going to use a very washy color, talking about your values. The lighter, the more water you use compared to pigment, the lighter the value. It's going to make that look like it's in the background. So that isn't light enough. So I added a little water. And I don't want to touch the leaf next to it. There we go. Now, as I make these darker, this light value is going to fall into the background. Like that. Might add a tiny bit of that pink. There we go. And if you don't want these hard edges, just take a damp brush, lift a little, and there you go. So can you see how, because this leaf in the back is a lighter value, meaning it's more water to pigment, it looks like it's in the background. We have one more leaf here, so let's go ahead and do that one. Just picking up my green, point of my brush, light pressure. As I move down, I'm pushing into the belly of my brush, getting that wider stroke. And I'm going to kind of leave it like that. I might add a little bit of that pink, just as a shadow down here. Maybe some of the darker. Something like that. And just a light wash at the bottom here to really make it look like it's feeding down. Softening that edge. And there you go. Look how beautiful that pink blended in with the green and creates that wonderful coherency of the flower. That's part of your composition, is making sure your eye just doesn't get stuck here on the pink it's kind of recognizing the pink down here, and it moves your eye around your painting. Now I'm just going to go in, since this is dry, and add in as if there's a little shadow there. Because it's, oopsie, that is way too much. There we go. So that looks like the shadow of the petal. Just tap in a tiny bit more. You could even use some of that pink in there. If you want to, just let it kind of pull down. And there you go. Might even add a tiny bit of that in here. Don't want to overwork this too much. Okay, we're going to leave that be. Let's go back to this, and then we'll come back and maybe do a glaze over some of those areas. So that's what I'm going to do here. I want to create a couple glazes. So using my brush, go in and pick up a little bit of a mixture of that pink I used, as well as some of that red. And I'm kind of mixing together. So I don't know if you can see here, but it's got quite a bit of water in there. And then I'm just going to start creating some glazes here. So point of my brush, like that. And then let's go in with a damp brush and we will just soften that out. Soften those edges. So I'm just using a very light wash and adding in some wonderful little washes. Like that. We could even get a little darker in here with some of that red. Maybe in here. So when you're working wet and wet, it gives you the wonderful opportunity to add in and let things kind of blend. I might even go in and just darken this even a bit more. Just layers and layers and layers. I'm lifting here, and there you go. I think that is perfectly fine. Let's go on to this one because it's in the back. So I'm again picking up a little bit of that pink and that red. Tip of my brush, and I start laying down my brush. And now I'm going to go in and soften those edges. Just like that. And deepen the red color in here. And these beautiful layers, they really allow the colors underneath to come out. Now if you see, I've got just a tiny bit of bleed right there into this other petal, so I just picked it up. Kind of lifting here with a damp brush, or a thirsty brush as they call it. Might tap into a little bit more of that deep red. See how I washed my brush, but look at how much red is still on here. Quite a bit when you're using that red. You want to make sure, especially when you're done painting, that you get all that red out, because that will ruin your brush. I might even leave a little bit of that hard edge in. Okay, now see this I've got here, it's kind of bleeding over. So I just take a damp brush and kind of blend it in. There you go. So you could just keep doing that with all of these petals. Just going in. I want to completely get rid of these whites I have in here. And being careful as I go around those little spots. There we go. Wash and rinse my brush, go in and do a little bit of that push and pull just to feather that edge. And there we go. Okay. I think we're doing pretty good here. I might add a little bit of that red in here because I want it to look like the petals are going in. Might even do some of that right here. You could even add in a little bit of green tint in there to make it look like a shadow. Constantly washing and rinsing my brush, especially when you're using those red colors because they can be quite intense. So let's see what happens if we add in some of that greenish red. See what kind of color we get here. That might be nice on the inside here, just to look like a shadow. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's kind of nice. I'm going to use a very light touch and just draw in with the tip of my brush some of these little veins. The key for me is I don't like to have really hard lines, but sometimes you need a little of those in here. Just to guide the eye a bit. So I'm adding in, now these might be better done with that 6 long. like that. Again, everybody's different. You might like these harder lines. They do guide the eye around, which I like. And there you go. Now we could keep working on this, like adding in some darker shadowy. This is my green. Just to get that look of the petal going down inside. This is one of the reasons why, again, I love watercolors, because we can do these glazes using kind of light values, tapping off my brush, and they don't completely paint over what you've got here. They just leave a nice wash. And I can still see the green coming through. I'm sorry, the red underneath. And I just love that. Now this is getting a little bit of a hard edge, so I'm just going to go in and soften that. And then soften these edges. So I'm just really using this same technique over and over and over. And if you feel you're getting this line like this, just do that push and pull technique. And it should soften that up. Just dabbing in while it's wet. Some of that dark green. And that really pulls it in. So I think we're about done here. That's pretty much what I wanted to do. You can always play with some glazes over these bottom leaves. Something like that, if you wanted. But I think these are pretty good just how they are. I like this, kind of feels like it's catching the light. And these two are a little bit more in the back. Maybe a little bit down here at the bottom. Really creating some interest here. And I think I'm about done. Just softening that line again. Just layers and layers. There you go. What do you think, guys? I hope you had fun doing this. I'll list all of my supplies for you. I feel like I want to darken these edges a tiny bit more. Just to give them a little bit more contrast. But this is, you can do this on your own. Now, if you had a white, by the way, I don't think I have one here right now. Let's see if I've got one. This is one of those Sharpie white paint pens. I don't use this a lot, so let's see if we can get this to work. If you don't use them, they might take a while. Well, that might not be working. No, might be too dried out. So let's use our 6 long round and just go in with some white gouache. I really like my titanium white. This is a zinc white, the designer series from Winsor Newton, which works pretty well. And you could go in and create It's got a tiny bit of water. It's a little bit dry. So if you had used gouache, you wouldn't need this. You would just remove the gouache. And I was actually taught back in college not to use white paint, but you know. All right, well, I think I'm pretty much done here. I hope you guys enjoyed that. And I have the drawing for you if you'd like to grab that on my website. I will put together a kit, both the digital version and the original, which you would get this painting with a certificate. I will sign it, and you can look at it close up. I'll put both of those on Etsy for you. And right now all the digital kits are 50% off. So I hope you kind of take advantage of that. And I hope you had fun with this, everybody. All right, happy painting, and thanks for being here with me.